Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the special meeting of the Salisbury City Council, December 18th, 2017. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I would ask you please to silence all electronic devices. If for some reason an emergency should arise during the proceedings, please exit the room, make a right-hand turn and go down the stairs. Should that exit be blocked, please make a left-hand turn, a right-hand turn, and then go down the stairs. Please do not use the elevators. If you need special assistance, please ask and we'll be glad to provide it to you. I'll entertain a motion at this time to adopt the legislative agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Jackson, Mr. Boda. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. I'll entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 2471 for the second reading.
So moved.
Seconded.
Mr. Boda, Mr. Rudisil. Mr. Tillman?
Thank you.
That's a first.
Okay. This is an ordinance of the City of Salisbury to establish a nonprofit parking permit rate and to approve a temporary change in parking fees for all governmental entities parking permits effective January 1st, 2018. Whereas the City of Salisbury desires to reduce parking permits for fees for nonprofit organizations operating in the Central Business District and parking within the Downtown Parking District. And whereas some nonprofit organizations pay for their employees' parking permits within the Downtown Parking District, and whereas the City of Salisbury desires to temporarily waive the parking permit fee increases established in the 2018 fee schedule for all parking fees paid by all governmental entities, and that has been corrected since last time from Wycomico County, on behalf of their employees working in the Central Business District and parking within the Downtown Parking District. Now therefore be it ordained by the City Council, the City of Salisbury, that a nonprofit parking rate be established which shall reduce parking permit fees by 25% for Downtown Parking District parking permits purchased by nonprofit organizations operating in the Downtown Business District, effective January 1st, 2018. And be it further ordained by the City Council of the City of Salisbury that there shall be a temporary stay of fee increases shown in the 2018 fee schedule for all Downtown Parking District parking permits purchased by all governmental entities for their employees effective January 2018 to June 2018. That's it.
Any questions? Hearing none, I'll call the motion. All those in favor of ordinance number 2471, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. I'll entertain a motion to approve ordinance number 2472 for the second reading.
So moved.
Second.
Ms. Jackson, Mr. Poda.
Okay, this is an ordinance of the City of Salisbury to amend the fiscal year 2018 fee schedule to establish separate rates for transient parking pay stations. Whereas the city established a fee schedule with the adoption of the fiscal year 2018 budget of the City of Salisbury, and whereas the city will be installing pay stations for use of some of the city's transient parking spots, and whereas the fees listed in the 2018 fee schedule passed with ordinance number 2425 had parking meters and pay stations listed at the same rate, and whereas the pay stations will allow transient parkers to pay for multiple hours of parking at one time, and whereas the city desires to limit the number of hours that may be paid at one time to 3 hours and charge a premium rate for use of the pay station parking spots in excess of 2 hours in a row. And whereas the remaining fees in the 2018 fee schedule shall remain as currently set forth in the Salisbury Municipal Code, now therefore be it ordained and enacted by the Council of the City of Salisbury that the amended fee amounts in the attached Exhibit 1 FY 2018 fee schedule, parking permits and fees, be amended by the City of Salisbury, and the amount set forth therein shall supersede the corresponding fee amounts described in the Salisbury Municipal Code. And the fee schedule has the correct fees for the pay stations, as well as the statement in the fee schedule itself limiting to the 3-hour parking limit.
Any questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll call the motion. All those in favor of ordinance number 2472, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tillman.
Thank you.
Since there's no other business for the special meeting, the special meeting is adjourned. Welcome to the December 18th, 2018 work session. We have a couple of issues on the agenda tonight, and we will start with the chronic nuisance legislation. Susan, come on up. How are you?
I'm good. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Candy cane.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Merry Christmas. All right, we have again before you the chronic nuisance legislation that we've changed the name to problematic properties. Excuse me. Get this straight. Okay. We made some changes, some recommended changes, and go through here. So we did some clarification as far as the notice of violations that was requested. And then
What was that change?
clarifying that a call for service, if we went to a property on the same day and say that we made a visit and we found 5 different violations during that visit, say it was a broken window, tall grass, that they would not count individually, so we could find potentially 5 violations. They wouldn't count altogether as 5 individual occurrences, and then find someone as a chronic nuisance as one time. So we made that clear. There were a couple more as far as counting this as a 12-month calendar year. I think that might have been it. We did receive an email today, and I made some changes from that request, and I'll go through those.
That was regarding the violations of citation.
Correct. So I'll go through the email, starting with number 1. It says here that the request was notification should be sent to the property owner and posted on the property, stating that posting only could result in the resident taking it down and not telling the property owner. In Code Section 15.24200, method of service, all of our letters are required to be posted on the structure and also to be mailed to the owner of record. So what we have proposed to do in the code, where it discusses method of service for this, is to just include that when the notification is made, that it would be pursuant to, it would be on line 127, and it actually begins on line 126. It says, notice will be made by mailing a letter to the owner's address of record, or posting, that should be and posting, not or, and posting the notice at the problematic property, comma, pursuant to 15.24.200. So that's going to explain the requirement of posting and mailing. So that takes care of number 1. Number 2, talking about the triggering effects of, should be citations, not corrective action letters.
Right.
This one, I was a little bit confused if they were talking about just a language change, or if they were talking about all code violations be removed and it just be citations. We are in favor of keeping the legislation the way it is, as far as removing the nuisance violations as qualifying factors, only until they get to the point of citations, like we had put in here. But we will remove the language on line 33, where it's confusing where it says, which results in the issuance of a notice of violation, comma, corrective action letter, because notice of violation, comma, corrective action letter, those two are the one and the same. There's no difference. We use corrective action letter internally in the office, so we would choose to remove notice of violation.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then number 3 discusses add clarification language explicitly stating that we are dealing with one property, rental unit, et cetera, at a time, and not the landlord's entire portfolio. So on line 74, it says, after a property is designated as a problematic property, the owner shall be issued a fine in the amount of $500. In addition, the owner shall have his rental unit, we're gonna add unit, registration, and then we're gonna add for that problematic property, suspended for 6 months, and then so on. And that, I think that clarifies that.
Yep. Good.
Thank you.
And I believe that addresses all the clarifications and edits. I think we have a clean piece of legislation there. Do you have any questions?
Questions?
On line 40, it says trash receptacles or failure to remove snow from sidewalks. What are we
Yes.
saying about the trash receptacles? Am I misunderstanding the grammar there, or?
Trash receptacles, there's different violations that comes along with those. Like if people leave the trash receptacles on the sidewalk past their pickup dates, they are found in violation. So those violations count as a nuisance violation. They are not one that's counted until it reaches a citation. So for a trash receptacle to reach the point of citation, you have to do it more than 3 consecutive times.
So the issue with the trash receptacle is the leaving it on the curb.
Yes.
And I guess, for instance, where there's a common trash receptacle in a multi-housing unit, and the trash receptacle is not kept or maintained in an appropriate fashion.
Yeah, there's a couple different things that can also go along with the trash receptacle. If it repeatedly overflows and is not dumped, that can be an issue. If the receptacle is not large enough to meet the size of the multi-unit structure, that can be a violation. And so it does address multi-units. So if they fail to comply the first time that we issue a corrective action letter for that, it would result in a citation. So it could result in a citation at that point. In addition to the single-family residential issues with the receptacle, I failed to mention that you can't store just a normal trash receptacle in the front yard. It cannot be in plain view. It has to be in the rear. So that could result in a municipal infraction. But again, it has to be multiple times before it ends up in a citation for that.
So then, when I drive through Moss Hill, there's trash receptacles facing the main road. How does that bug?
Are they the smaller smaller brown cans?
They're the unfortunately ugly black trash cans that are in multi-unit. And I guess because what this brought to mind is there's several multifamily units where there are issues with trash. And then how do we address that? And it is a nuisance. And, how do you credit that to an individual? Do you credit it to the homeowners association, or?
It would be to the development. So it'd be to Moss Hill. There's a common area, because that isn't actually in a designated common area. It wouldn't be to units
What comes to my
specifically.
mind is Moss Hill, Merritt Mills, Shiloh.
Us. Village of Tony Tank Creek.
Village of Tony Tank Creek. This is happening all over the city.
Right.
And I just wonder would it take separate legislation to address the issues in these multi-unit, or is that something?
Those would go to the complex owner.
So with Merritt Mills, there is no complex owner. The townhomes are owned by individuals, and then the majority of people that reside there are renters. And
There should be an HOA
Yes.
or someone that owns
That's the
yeah, so
agent.
that's who would be responsible for that. That's who the corrective action letter would go to.
okay, so on Shiloh Street, where we have receptacles that have furniture all around them and they're deteriorating, I mean, just in awful condition. Because what this is ultimately leading to is people being removed to their homes, and how does it speak when we don't know exactly who the culprit is, I guess is the question. So it takes us in a different direction, because this is primarily focusing on the manner in which it's drafted primarily addresses single-family homes that are being rented to individuals and its impact on the single-family community. Is it time for us to begin thinking about legislation for the multifamily units? Or ordinances?
Well, isn't it covered by the same thing, except the only difference is that it goes to the homeowners association, the violation, so there, it is in there, from my understanding.
It
I
is.
know that-
It is, because we often write that up. I know what you're talking about, so.
So for
it-
instance, the homeowners association, let's say they were to receive 5 citations over the appropriate period of time, but we have no idea who in the complex is getting trash in the ponds or leaving trash out. What do? We just fine the homeowners association $500, or do we move forward and say you cannot be the homeowners association for this community? For
They would just receive corrective action letters and fines.
See, if, I'll give you an example.
You see where I'm going?
No,
though?
but I think it's covered, because, I'll give you an example. In our development, there was a public notice because we failed to, the homeowners association failed to have the trees trimmed in a timely manner. So it was a public notice, and if we didn't take care of it within that time period, then the homeowners association would receive a corrective action letter. And then if we didn't do anything about it, we'd be fined.
Right,
The homeowners association, which then comes back in terms of our allocation to each of the homeowners.
Yeah.
right. And then if not paid, it still goes on to that property as real estate taxes. It's the same manner.
If I may, Hart, I think I understand what you're saying. So the idea of the problematic property is, once you have the 5, you're suspended, your things are suspended. If with commonplace areas within that, you can't really suspend a multi-use facility, and he's wanting to know how you address that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's.
And that
I'm
is,
asking, do we need a separate ordinance to
Okay.
begin? Because there do need to be harsh sanctions.
Beyond
If
the
we're going to
fine
be
we're
this
talking about.
harsh towards these landlords, all of our, and it goes to community maintenance. We're 74% renters in this city, so we do need ordinances that ensure quality of life for all of our residents.
and that is something we can discuss, but I don't.
If it's a multifamily unit, for example, if we can tie the violations to a specific unit, then that unit would be the problematic property. I think where we can't tie to a unit, then we'd have to deal with the overall organization. I mean, I think that one of the problems is usually where you're dealing with a homeowners association or a landlord who owns 50 apartments, usually the fines are enough to get compliance. But when you're dealing with a unit where everyone who lives there is judgment-proof and doesn't care, that's really what this is intended to go after. You know, where the fines just make no difference, you know, they never do. So I think that this clearly is intended to go after one particular living unit that is the cause of the violations. If we can't narrow it down to a unit, then I'm not aware of any instances where the fines didn't work against a larger group. Are you, Susan? I mean, the fines usually do bring a large, I mean, if you're talking about a townhouse complex
Yeah,
or a homeowners association,
They work in that situation.
they usually comply, that's my understanding. But if we had one that didn't, you're right, it could be a problem.
It sounds like you want us to look into that just further to make sure that the bigger multi-use facilities are complying or being able to be held accountable, just like individual landlords are.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
Okay.
What we'll do is, we'll put that on tomorrow's agenda meeting.
Okay.
We'll make sure that we put that on the next, one of the work sessions, and
Okay.
give you enough time. When you let us know how long it would take just to review it, and then we'll talk about it at that
Okay.
point. Is that
Okay.
all right?
Yeah, I just don't think it affects this, but yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And Jack, I do have a question too. On line 53, I'm still dealing with that overdose being excluded. If a person there's an overdose at a house or whatever, I have an issue with that, because if there's an overdose, how do we describe overdoses? Because when you have an overdose at a residence, at a house, 9 times out of 10, with what's going on today, you're gonna have more than one. And then that goes into criminal activity, drug dealing. drug selling, or young people using those houses for, drug parties. So how do we deal with this?
If I may, it is a double-edged sword. I think with a lot of these calls to services, the idea is to make sure that we are not discouraging people from calling the police or medical personnel to report to an incident, like an overdose. There could be underlying factors or additional causes that have created that overdose, but it becomes, I don't know, speculation at best to guess why it's happening. We don't have chief here to discuss it, so I could see it both ways. But what we don't want to do is somebody to have an overdose to say, well, we shouldn't call. Let's just dump them or not deal with it. That would be a worse scenario, in my opinion.
I think it's, it's going to be depending on the situation. If they respond to an overdose and there's something else going on there, that would qualify as a call for service. So but if it's just somebody who's home, overdosed, and they call for help, or somebody calls for help for them, I don't think that landlord should be penalized because of that. But if there's another situation where
That's
there's
what I'm saying,
like a
if
party.
there is
So
another
that would
situation.
be, that situation, like a party, would be a different situation, that if they actually made an arrest, if something else happened there, that might qualify for a point. So
But a known, I understand
can't
what you all
just
are saying
say-
too, but a known overdose, with what's going on today, with the opioid crisis that we're having, 9 times out of 10, if you have one overdose at a residence, you're gonna have more, because there's something linked to it. Now, I know there are people who accidentally overdose on medication. I do know that. But and no, I don't want people to be afraid to call when there is an overdose. But I do want people to know that a signal goes off, something's wrong. Something's wrong here.
Well, I think if I understand the way it's written, if, for instance, they went in and they found a significant amount of narcotics exposed on the table, then the chief would have or whoever's there, the senior officer would have the ability to take it to another level. That's different, and I think that goes beyond the overdose, the concern about the person who took the overdose. Because this is supposed to be, and I agree with what Andy's saying about it's a dual-edged sword, but I think that if there's evidence of a greater problem, I think the authorities would make that decision when they're there. I don't know how you would, I was just trying to think of how you would write this, and I can't think of a way to do it that would not protect the person or the people who would call for whoever had the overdose.
Mr. President, one thing we'll have to look, Maryland has like a Good Samaritan.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
true.
have not researched, in other words, if we do include something about the overdose, we might be stepping on state law, so I'd need to look into that
Okay.
and see what that.
Well,
And I
could you
will.
do that for the next work
Yeah, I
session?
will.
Just bring it
I'll
back.
look, I'll look that up.
And then if we need to make an adjustment to this. we
Yeah,
can
okay.
do
Yeah,
that.
because
Okay.
whatever, we can't supersede whatever Maryland
Yeah, I
law
understand
says.
that, yeah.
Okay,
But I just have-
good suggestion.
I have
I
a
would
concern.
just interject that I think preservation of life trumps all other factors. I doubt you would go into the place and find drugs on the table. If you do,
Well,
Thank you.
they aren't very good at their job, and they should look into another profession. But the same goes with the domestic and the sexual assaults. These are incidents that are going to have many textures, and you're going to get multiple issues, but you don't want to disincentivize people taking any sort of step, because the appropriate action where you have a overdose, if there's drug use, it's a health issue, and then what we would have is, we would have to trigger social services. And we don't want people to feel that they'll lose, and people are already gonna feel that they're gonna lose their home, and that they don't wanna call the authorities in. In certain communities, there's already gonna be disincentives just based on cultural perspective. So I'm comfortable with the sort of amnesty granted, especially with all the lives we're losing across the country to opioid.
Thank you. Okay, we have several people that want to make some comments. I would remind everybody of the rules. You'll have 3 minutes to make your point if we've taken care of it, or if you want to say the same thing as the person ahead of you. You can just say, I agree with that and support that position. If you have something to add, we'd be glad to hear it. So I'll go in the order in which they were handed in. Lynn Bratton, you're up first. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Lynn Bratton. I'm sure. I live at 303 South Boulevard, Salisbury, Maryland. I am a property owner, and I am still concerned about one area in this problematic property legislation. I appreciate wholeheartedly changing the "or" to "and" for our notification. I think that's appropriate, and I appreciate that that's the way that's going to happen. I also appreciate that there was clarification on the individual unit versus all the properties owned by an owner. I think that was clarification that was necessary to be in writing. The part that I'm still concerned about, and just looking at this now from through the eyes of the potential of it being subjective observations by inspectors. All the list of everything that's a nuisance violation is all of these things. This won't count, this won't count, this won't count. What about like if they don't put a light cover back on an outside light when they change the bulb and they don't cover it back up? That'll be another triggering event. That, to me, that's like a nuisance one. So there are so many that are, maybe a broken screen or something. There's so many many are listed here, but there are still others that still are in that, this is really not life safety issues. So, and there's also the concern in my mind of, okay, this one counts, but this one doesn't. This one counts, but this one doesn't. To the point that we're gonna need more technology to keep track of all of this, or more secretarial staff, or more bookkeeping, if you will, to just keep it clean so that so the charts are clean. That's a lot. If 74% of our population is rental property, that's a lot of bookkeeping that I just think it could be cleaner if, instead of doing this counts, this doesn't, this counts, this doesn't, if you just did a call for service that's gonna hit as a ping becomes when a citation is issued. Whether it's a nuisance one or something else. If it's written up, you've got your 10 days, 20 days to fix it. If as a landlord you're not willing to do it, then by golly, you need to get pinged with it because you're not doing what you ought to be doing, and you got every right to hit us with it. But if it's something that's not included in these nuisance violations, but still something not really major, and we fix it, but it happens to be what this set of inspectors on this neighborhood on this day seem to be looking for, versus a completely similar situation on another side of the town where somebody's been out sick and it gets missed. It just seems like it's putting so much subjectivity into it as opposed to clean and clear, this is and this isn't something that's going to be pinged. You were warned, you didn't fix it, by golly, you got a ticket, so shame on you. Get pinged, let that count as one of your one. I'm just looking at the bookkeeping of it. Even down to the police, you got all the police ones now. This is gonna count, these aren't, and these are gonna count, and these aren't. And I think we have to keep that because of the Good Samaritan law and for the fact that we don't want to disenfranchise people from reporting. But this other one, I just think it would be a lot cleaner just to say, it's when you get a citation. And that would get rid of all, because the nuisance violations are gonna ping us if we get a citation. That's in here. If you don't do it, it's still gonna ping once you get the citation. So just make it all citations, period, and clean it up. It just seems like it's got a lot of wordiness to it that I think is going to end up being more complicated down the road. I just can't imagine whether you're gonna give numbers to everything and then you're gonna have a sorting process with your computers. I'm not computer savvy enough to even understand how you could even start to keep spreadsheets where this could all be tracked in an efficient way. So I'd like to see still Just make it clean, just make it when a citation is issued. Not a call, not a corrective action letter, not a notice of violation, just when we get a citation. If we don't do what we're supposed to do, shame on us. Okay,
Ms.
thank
Brad.
you.
Thank you. Okay, next up is Danny Morris.
I was gonna say the same thing, Chief.
Okay. Jake Chandler, could you just go up to the, if you're gonna speak?
I was going to pretty much say the same thing that Lynn did, but you know, with the exclusions, I don't think there's any way you could possibly make enough exclusions for all the little things that the city inspectors write to not have it, like she said, where it's notice of violation. In addition to that, I talked to the mayor about it, and he seemed to be in agreement with that, writing it that way. I'm not sure why it hasn't come that way yet, but he seemed to think that notice of violation, or let me get your words. That the municipal citation is the way it should be worded, as a ping, so to speak, and not notice of violation or a corrective action letter, which could be a multitude of things that is so, you know, like she said, to the discretion of the city inspector. I mean, you know, one inspector writes up one thing, other inspectors write up other things, and I mean, there's so many small infractions that you can walk around the house and find that there's no way that you could have a list of exclusions long enough that would basically make it anything other that makes sense other than a municipal citation. So that would be what I would have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I would just like to point out that it was a lot cleaner when we started, and most of it was developed because of recommendations to exclude things. So we've gone full circle now almost on this thing. So,
Wonder if that's by design.
it's a little bit confusing, but I hear what, you know, we're listening to what you said. I think we have a good piece of legislation now, but we have a couple more comments, so let's go through that. Brett, you're up.
Brett Hopkins, 925 Eastern Shore Drive. Agree with what Lynn said, 100%. Thank you for reading the email and taking action on it. Very much appreciate that. If we could turn it around maybe and manage by exception, if we could go to municipal citations plus, that way it would get rid of these nuisance violations. So go to municipal citations, what we've just said, the last 2 or 3 people up here, plus these 1 or 2 things, which if you get a letter in this regard, that counts as a service call, because we mean it. We want this fixed, and a letter is a triggering event. But everything else is, if you don't get a citation, there's no increment to the 5. So what I would ask is, if Susan knows of, it seems like we're trying to back into excluding all these things that are nuisance, but then potentially all these other things that inspectors could find could still be triggering events. Let's get away from that. Let's say citations plus these 3 letters. If you get those letters, you're in trouble. Get moving, because we mean it. And that's what I would ask Susan is, are you thinking there's 3 or 4 or 5 things that you don't want to write letters on? If there are, then let's write those in there. Citations plus these 3, 5, 10 letters. And then we might be able to accept that, because then we know your sensitivities. Because that's what we're all trying to go for collectively, is clean up the neighborhoods best we can with the good landlords acting on your behalf, or acting on our behalf, to keep you out of our business. And I think that's reasonable. It's management by exception. And that's what we do on a daily basis. I mean, we manage the one-offs, because 90% of everything is pretty much cookie cutter, and that's where our profit is and all that. It's the one-offs we manage to, and that's what I'm asking is if we could come to a one-off list, and that's what we manage to with you. And I don't know if there are 5, 6, 10 things that you're that sensitive to. But I would say let's put those in here instead of trying to come up with this exhaustive list. But then there's all this other stuff we don't even know about because we don't know what kind of lists you guys have. I mean, we've expressed, like President Heath just said here, we've come to this list because we're sensitive to these things because these are probably 95% of the letters we get. Grass, windows, screens, that kind of thing. Okay, thank you.
That was the end, in case you didn't get it. I can start it, but I don't know how to stop it.
If I could just add something, I know, going back to something that Ms. Bratton said, I know that she mentioned light covers. I realize that light covers is something that's very trivial, but we have to write those up. So it'd be hard, because they're a fire hazard. Dust that accumulates on a light bulb is a fire hazard. So what seems like trivial violations that's throughout the code that the code enforcement officers write up are all potential serious violations. While I realize a torn screen is not, that's property maintenance, but it would be too hard to go through the whole code and eliminate violations to say that these are not important, because they're really all important. So I'm just using the light cover, for example, whether interior or exterior, an electrical outlet cover or a light switch cover, those things. While it's something that's so minor, we really can't exclude something like that. So, in removing the nuisance type, those are the ones that are not life safety.
I'm glad you said that because I have two things on my mind at this moment regarding this legislation. First, I don't know what constitutes minor because it seems to me if you have several minor issues, it begins to point in the direction that this is a neglected property. And it has the potential of being, what are we calling it, problematic property at this time? And then I guess my other question, and I don't know if you will be able to elucidate this for me, and you'll have to excuse my incompetence, where are we at this time, and what's the distance between where we are and what's being asked of us by the constituents?
Well, we were originally asked by them to remove the nuisance, so we've done that. And they said to only count it when it gets to the point of citation, so we've done that, and that's where we are. And I'm very comfortable in that because I can, in good faith or good conscience, remove something that could be a potential life safety issue. So I need to enforce those.
But my feeling isn't even life safety issues. Let's say that someone is letting algae grow on the side and go of their home and letting it grow. It begins to send a signal to people in the area. This is not a well-kept home. We don't have to respect this property. And then it contributes to additional issues, I think.
Well, to take it even further with the tall grass and rubbish, to say that someone's got 3-foot tall grass in the backyard and rubbish, police are on foot chase and they're chasing somebody through the backyards and they can't see something, and then they fall and they're not able to apprehend somebody, and God knows what else, they hurt somebody. So wild grass is very trivial and rubbish, yes, I get it, but there's a bigger scheme to this whole thing than just mowing your grass.
And then I will, and I agree, and then with the tall grass, before the police chase happens, there's the mouse chase and the snake
Absolutely.
chase. The vermin that the tall grass brings. But I would say,
All right, you've had, no yelling out from the,
but
we're in discussion now based on your comments, so just give us the time.
yeah,
Hardy, may I?
yeah.
So just for clarification points, I think everybody knows, but just so it's explained, there's really 3 ways of looking at an HCDD call for service. There is, one end is a violation, so when you get a corrective action letter. The other side is the citation / an abatement, where we do like a clean and lean. So there's one violation only, those count. There's one, citations only count. And the way it's written right now is there is a, in between, a list, I'll call it, of some that are in, some that are out. Somebody has mentioned looking at it in a different way, so to include only the ones that we want to call as dings, the more life safety ones of sorts. And the way we have it written is exclusionary versus inclusive. So there's three options: in, out, or this list that we have to decide if we. And I think that's kind of the first step. Is it only citations and abatements? Are we doing everything, or are we doing some menu of options that then that menu will be this revolving door of who chooses what is important and what's not important, and that would be kind of what's on this list. So
When a property is inspected, everything has to be written up that is in violation. So they can't just say, I'm just gonna write up that broken window and not the torn screens or something. It has to be written up holistically. So they can't just pick and choose, I'm just gonna write the grass today and not write up something else. So they have to do it in total, everything. So they should not be missing something or picking and choosing what they feel like writing up that day.
And there is an appeal process, so there
Absolutely.
is human discretion at a certain stage. So
Absolutely,
if
always.
somehow we do have a lot of frivolous things, then there's a body of people that could say, oh, a lot of these complaints are frivolous, this doesn't need to be marked as this type of.
Yes.
Sounds like somebody who's circling that body.
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does.
Duly noted and recorded.
Yes, it does, sounds just like that.
Any other comments or questions?
I'm good with the changes.
Okay. Do we have consensus then? Do we have consensus? Okay, we have consensus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for your input. Appreciate it.
Stay right here.
Next up is Airbnb.
Everyone.
You didn't write down nuisance. You wrote down property maintenance, Airbnb, and salary.
Oh, isn't property maintenance part of it? That's what I meant.
Okay, then feel free to come up.
It looks like I'm the minority, because I'm not a landlord, I'm a resident. And I was glad to see that everything they talked about, and were specific, especially about trash cans, grass, mildew, et cetera. I'm also agreeing with you, as it's very confusing with the definition of problematic and what is the weight of a nuisance violation, and on and on and on. So needs to be cleaned up, but it also needs to be specific, because I've lived with it for years. There are trash cans that have never been pulled back, and I don't want to get into it with a compliance person and argue about, well, are you going to write it up or not? It's all about making Salisbury a better place and properties maintained, regardless of whether it's rentals or residences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Okay, we're moving on to Airbnb.
He doesn't need it.
He fumbled.
Andy, I'm over here.
So what I've handed out is just the slides of what I'm going to present right now, in case people want to make notes or reference it as we move forward. The legislation that you have, we can get into it, but what I wanted to do first was give a kind of an overview presentation of some information that we've learned through the review process and exploratory phases of kind of developing our legislation recommendations, and then also just kind of an understanding of why municipal policies are created in the first place. I'll start going through it. If there's questions along the way, we can jump into it, or we can just do the questions and discussion after the end. It's only about 12 slides. If I can get this to work. There we go. So the big question is, why have a municipal policy? And it's a holistic approach. It's to provide additional housing inventory, which most people think about when you think about Airbnbs or these short-term rentals is the inventory, adding to the inventory. But it's also while maintaining neighborhood integrity and safety. The policy will minimize home sharing challenges, including negligence and abuse by both the property owner and the renter. So if we look at the housing inventory right now, so why is it important? This is what everybody talks about. The big things that we have going on in our community. We have 19 hotels that have 1,558 rooms, 3 campgrounds. Well, right now, for one of our biggest events that we have in the community is a USSSA World Series event. They list 11 local hotels that they feel comfortable marketing those hotels to the public. That has a total of only 1,088 rooms. So last year, the average was 128 teams per week. So if you do the math of 128 teams times 12 girls a team, we are only at 70% of our needs for that week. And that's if every single room was used for just the tournament. So as you can tell, there's already a shortage. So people go into Ocean City or they look farther away. So instead of having to do the travel distance, having inventory here locally will be helpful for those events. These are some of the other events. So if you think about it, we have all of our national sports tournaments, our special events like the Folk Festival and the Marathon, where people are coming in from out of town to stay. We also have Salisbury University with the Seagull Century Ride and graduations. There's also national dog competitions that bring in thousands of people. That's the Golden Retrievers Club of America and the Poodle Club of America. And then your other items, your weddings, your concerts, your conferences, any of those other events that typically happen at the Civic Center that bring in out-of-town guests. Not as big as some of the other ones, but still require hotel rooms. So when looking at all that, we see that these are our policy objectives when we're creating a policy. The housing availability, which we've talked about, but then also neighborhood preservation to protect the quality of life, safety for not only the neighborhood, but also the renter, and then economic development. So where do we get our regulation best practices from? There's a company called Host Compliance that we have done a presentation with and talked with about this. They currently represent dozens of different cities, municipalities from all different ranges. Some of those names up there are cities the size of 5,000 people up to Toronto, which has million plus in it. So there's a lot of varying degrees of needs. Most of these are located in Florida or California or destination locations. For example, Garfield, I think Garfield, Wyoming is a place of like Yellowstone National Park and places like that. I'm sorry, Jackson, Wyoming, I apologize, is a place of like ski lodges, national parks, things like that people want to go and visit. So a lot of the best practices that we came up with, our recommendations came from this company that we met with. So what we thought to start off with was the eligibility to register. We came up with 3 ways. Must be an owner's primary residence to eliminate rental properties or vacant properties would be ineligible. Must be a permanent resident, no tenants. This would prohibit the subleasing of properties for non-property owners. I can't rent the house that I'm currently renting. And then subsidized housing is ineligible. The idea would be if you're receiving additional assistance for your housing, you would not be able to make a profit off of that housing too.
May I?
Yeah.
Why are we saying people that rent can't rent out a room?
Because it's not their property.
But this is my point, shouldn't that be between the renter and the property owner through the private contract that they enter into through the lease? Why are we as a municipality? Because if I'm barely getting by and I'm a college student and I can fit out a nice bedroom in my apartment, and I'm gonna be subject to the public opinion, because what we're thinking about are clearinghouses where people can come through. If my landlord doesn't want me to do that, the landlord can build it into the lease, and then if I do it, then the landlord can ask me to leave the property. I'm just.
Yeah, no, it's up for discussion. This is just what we have come up with, but it.
I'm just wondering if there's a rationale behind it.
The rationale behind it is it would, and most of those guys left already.
I know. I was wondering why.
Is if they didn't know that, if they didn't know they were going to do it, if they didn't know they were going to do it, and they said don't do it, and they still do it, that would still be a code violation, and then there would be a whole other series of potential going down the chronic nuisance violations, things that they haven't agreed upon, we would still ding the property owner, not the person who's doing it. So then you have to decide about the eviction process. Is it an evictable offense? Do they want to do that for somebody who's, rented out their house? It can get a little stickier that way. I'm not saying it can't be done. This is just one of the, when I said best practices, people do it both ways. One of the pieces with that, some people talk, we do not necessarily live in a vacation district like Ocean City or mountain homes or things like that, where people do use vacation homes as a rental property. They've rented out in certain times, or timeshares, et cetera. We don't necessarily live in that jurisdiction. So it can happen. This was just one of the recommendations. So it is up for discussion at that point. And again, it just adds another layer. But we, on our side, would still, as if it was a lease or a rental, the rental property, if you're renting it, the property owner is still going to have to comply with all of the regular pieces. Any other comments before we kind of circle back? Okay. I know people are reading ahead too. Requirements to operate code compliance. The idea is to obtain a registration. This is a new document that would be creating. They would, if they want to register, they go through HCDD. You have to pass an inspection. The property must be code compliant, and then you pay a registration fee. Now, with the inspection piece, the biggest part, what we have found through our conversations with host compliance, is people were selling shams. They weren't selling exactly what was there. They were saying something and it wasn't there. People were showing up to the properties and living in homes that did not have running water, that had holes in the walls, different things. And yes, that is between the renter and the person who is rentee. So you can get negative remarks on an Airbnb, but we still in the city should not be encouraging those type of living conditions, period. I think all of our housing stock should still maintain the same level if we're going to allow people to come to our area and live in these areas. I don't want people getting duped, but again, that's up for discussion. And the registration fee was the number that we came up with of $100. Then comply with all city ordinances, as I mentioned earlier, file and pay taxes, and then comply with ADA requirements. Neighborhood stewardship, this is a piece that that we've found is the biggest sticking point. Is it's not the people whose home, it's their neighbors who thought they lived by a single family dwelling or a different property and is now being rented out every day to people who are staying for a couple days and then leaving. It's kind of this revolving door that they didn't feel like they signed up for. Now, some of the issues have been parking. There's just too many cars in the parking lot. There's not enough garbage disposal. Trash is left all over the place. There's partying late hours of the night. So those are things that I think are pretty easy fixes to enforce. Then to not exceed maximum rental nights. It's an arbitrary number, but that's 30 weekends, which is about half the year, just over half the year. So you can rent out your property for half the year of all the weekends. And then 30 consecutive nights, basically, as Susan would add to it, if you live in a property for more than 30 days, you get to 31, you actually have squatter rights at that point, which we want to prevent from happening.
Can you contract squatter rights away? Can you contract squatter rights away?
I don't,
Mark? Can you-
Well, they're just saying if you rent a property for, a month, that you have the right to notice before you can be evicted and all that stuff, so.
So should it be 29 days?
well, she said, I think it's 31 days is when it hits, so you can have up to 30.
Oh, okay.
We'll check that. I haven't result either.
Requirements to operate, and then here's the last part, is safety. Adhere to the maximum occupancy during rental. During the application process, we will ask them how many occupants they're going to have, and then they need to adhere to that. So if you say your house is going to hold 8 people and you got 16, that's a problem. Because that means more vehicles, more traffic, more trash, all of those pieces. And then one of the biggest issues is the contact. People will go on vacation themselves, rent out their house, and then there's an issue and there's nobody local to help out solve that. So HCDD is getting the call, the police department's getting the call, we're getting the call, hey, this is an issue. So we are requiring there's some sort of local contact be in the area to be able to address those emergencies. We're not saying how quickly the emergency, but it needs to be just basically addressed within 24 hours. I forget exactly if we spelled it out in the legislation or not, but there needs to be what we're considering a local contact. You can be available for emergencies. This is how we would enforce it, our policy enforcement. There's people who are currently renting. We would do our best effort to notify them. We would then have HCD do the monitoring on most of the popular sites. The big two are right there. There are about 120 different sites that people do things. HCD, we're responding to complaints from neighbors who suspect properties. So if people we haven't caught are doing something, a neighbor calls it in, we can always then check it out then. The citation right now is $250 per infraction. That's not per day, that's per like rental. The idea, if it costs you $100 to rent it, the citation needs to exceed that, so people aren't just paying the citation if they get caught. And then if you do have a unit that's been registered, but then you are not following code compliance or over occupancy or any of those other requirements, we can cite you, but then also suspend or terminate your unit registration property for a period of time. That's just a quick overview of what this actually says. We can open up for further discussion. I do know we've received some comments about eligibility, which is one of them was, can renters do it? And then also the process of having inspections. People wanted to know should they have to allow their home to be inspected. Again, for a safety standpoint, we still think that's an important piece to it.
We have requests from two different people to speak about this or make comments. Riley, you're up first again, please.
All of the concerns I have are the normal ones: noise, parking, partying, etc. And for instance, 809 Camden is a perfect example. What are we going to do about parking when the residence really has none on the street and very limited parking in the driveways? And what they've done at 809 Camden, which was Debbie Campbell's old house, they just drove down the backyard and through someone else's yard to get out. And now they're using that as an open highway to do whatever they want. And that's the halfway house, in case you have any questions. And again, I had many years of the Salisbury rugby team living next to me, etc. But now I have a strong landlord system by me who maintains the properties, and if I have any trouble, I call them and it's fixed. That needs to be in place, and it's not necessarily in place in other college rentals or regular rentals on my street. So whatever amount of strength we can get in the ordinance for a quick fix of all of the defecations that you mentioned, it would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chris, I'm sorry, I can't read your last name.
It's my bad handwriting. Hi, Merry Christmas. Just wanted to make a couple suggestions on this, and I'm really glad we're addressing it. I think it's awesome to think that individuals can help provide a solution to a need, and we're gonna need housing for these big events coming up. So as a landlord, I can give you a couple of items of advice, and I didn't know this till I started doing a little bit of renting in Ocean City, but I did find this out, and this might help you. In Ocean City, the way they get around problem properties is if you keep the lease under 7 days, the police can throw people out. And that's what they do down there. So even if in one of my rentals, if I wanted to have a 2-week lease, I do 2 7-day leases. See what I'm saying? So if you end up having a really problematic renter, they can be immediately evicted as long as the landlord's called and attends while the police are there, they're out. So that is a relief to me to know it protects my property. That was just one item I wanted to tell you. Number 2, I don't think you should restrict rental, people like me, who run rentals now from doing any Airbnb, simply because I might have a vacancy at the time you have a need to provide housing for people for, let's say, the folk festival. There's gonna be a lot of people coming into town. If I happen to have a vacancy at that time, why am I not permitted to go ahead and use my property? It's already been licensed and inspected. It would help fulfill your needs. So I don't think you should cut off your nose to spite your face on that one. The other question I just had was, do we have, you're talking about inspecting potential Airbnb properties, which is fine if you want to do it. I'm just wondering about the manpower in order to do, do you have the manpower for it? That's just a question that I would have, that I would wonder about, because it seems like that department's pretty overworked right now as it is. So, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm going to respond to the second one.
Go ahead.
And I appreciate you bringing that up. So one of the things, we're not a San Francisco or Bay Area or New York City or a Miami. What was happening is landlords were buying up all the vacant properties, and instead of turning them into lease rentable places, it was 100% Airbnbs full time. So that was what was happening. It wasn't the vacant property. It was, we're going to create a demand because of high traffic concentration, because the return per that is so much higher than like a normal lease. Now, again, we don't have that problem. We are not a vacation destination on a daily basis where people are looking to move here. So that's why the best practice is there. Again, I can see it from both standpoints of how it works. But again, it's recommendations versus what it has to end up being.
Questions?
I had sent an email a couple weeks ago when we were discussing this, and one of the ideas I had, because I do think, and it addresses one of your questions, of having to do an extraordinary amount of inspections. I mean, if you have 1,000 properties that want to sign up and do Airbnb, and they want to do it, in a short amount of time, do you have the manpower to handle 1,000 additional inspections? Just a thought, not saying it's going to be that, I'm just saying, you never know. So could there be a timeline if someone, at least to have a couple levels where it's 15 days or less or 30 days or less that they intend to use Airbnb per year, have everybody submit an application, but if it goes above 30 days, then those properties should be inspected, or 15 days, or, something to think about on that. I think one of them I said is, if there's an owner-occupied property and they have calendar availability more than 30 days, but less than 45 days, there should be an application, but no fee or inspection. Over 45 days per year, there should be a $60 per year or $100, and an inspection to certify occupancy. So that's something to discuss. I don't know anybody's thoughts on that.
Can you repeat that? The tiers?
What I initially wrote was, if they have calendar availability more than 30 days, but less than 45 days, there should be an application, but no fee or inspection. If it's over 45 days per year, there should be a $60 per year fee and an inspection to certify occupancy. So obviously, you're going to be monitoring the major sites anyway, Airbnb, and I think whatever the other one you mentioned. So that's something to, I don't know if we want to discuss something like that, how other members feel about that suggestion.
I understand about the number of units that we could be registering. I have a hard time saying that we should not inspect all of them just because of any violations that could be existing in them, and having people come into a structure and staying, someone's going to rent one, welcome to Salisbury, they don't have an operating toilet. We don't want to review like that. Or they come in, they don't have operating smoke detectors, and there's a fire that night, and it's one that was registered with us, but they didn't get an inspection. That's where my line of thinking always goes. I
It's not
think
the good apples, it's the bad apples. That's
Right.
the
Well,
tough part. We're just considering.
There's
so
always the
A
one.
fire may or may not happen if it's an Airbnb or not, so we don't
Absolutely,
expect
but-
owner-occupied
At
homes,
least you could be covered.
but.
absolutely,
Yeah.
but I think that we have to always ensure that what is being leased or rented is code compliant.
Yeah.
I think that we may need to just assess what we're gonna have coming in, which we can absolutely do with looking at these sites, and find a way to make the inspections work, even if they're gonna be over a 6-month period of time.
Yeah.
Just say that they're gonna register them, and then within this period of time, we will be coming in to inspect. If we can't handle them all at the time of registration. I just don't feel comfortable with something being registered with the city of Salisbury not being code compliant or having a life safety violation out there that's not corrected. That's just my personal thought, and you guys,
I
please
read
weigh
the-
in, and my mind could be changed, but that's just how I feel.
Sort of in that vein, but slightly different approach. In the Annapolis policies, they have exemption areas. So for the Naval Academy graduation, there's an exemption. You can go on, anyone can go on Airbnb. And when they know there's going to be a major event, they sort of just open the floodgates.
They could have a huge influx of.
Yeah,
One
because
and
my
done.
concern becomes, there's always this presumption that the strange person we don't know is going to come in and do a bad thing. But I don't agree with that perspective, because wherever there's people, there's bad things occurring. Because that's the nature of being a human being. So, us fearing people from other communities, we might be putting ourselves out of the market. If I go to Airbnb right now, there's going to be 58 listings for this area. Several of them are outside. If we put a lot of legislation on top of this, and Fruitland does it, and Fruitland has a lot of nice new housing facilities, then they end up with that business, they end up with that tax revenue.
I think and some of my ideas were generated from a letter we got from a resident who is doing it. And they have guidelines themselves as, whenever they have somebody who's staying, it's not that they're leaving for the weekend. They're there when the people are there. The only people that they will allow stay there with them are people that either they know or have stayed with them before and they didn't have any issues. Now, not every person who rents is going to be like this individual, but his concern is they don't do it a lot. They do it maybe 5 or 6 times a year. But he says if he has to go and get his home inspected, pay a thing, he's not going to do it. And we may be hurting ourselves if we put too much regulation on it and not allow a little flexibility in the market to allow it to work. I mean, if we just go in and just clamp it all down,
And I think
we're
there's.
gonna end up like Paris.
Yeah. Well, we're in an interesting, again, is it operating relatively well right now? I would say so. Are we getting a lot of complaints to HCDD or calls for service to these houses that are currently managing Airbnbs? No, not really. And again, we're not a tourist destination vacation location where people are looking to make a lot of money on a 365 basis. So what we have to also decide is, if we move this around, sometimes you don't even, if we like what's already the self-regulating process, and there's not enough in here to prevent it, there's no reason to have a weak policy. So, looking at some of this stuff, if we're going to back off owner-occupied, if we're going to back off of inspections, if we're going to back off some of the big things, then now it's just down to following code compliance. Well, geez, we don't have to even put that in law. You just do it. You just force it. And then you just get dinged as the property owner, period. We don't really have to spell it out again. So it's, the big three really are inspecting the properties, who can rent. The eligibility piece is really the big pieces.
I think
Not for a moneymaker.
from my perspective, the initial inspection is going to be the crunch. Once the initial inspection is done, anybody that's been on the Airbnb, I go on to look at, because of this, on the Airbnb site, there's some pretty good, when you see that there's a lot of negative comments, that's your inspection, because people are giving you feedback.
Right.
Not saying that all the positive feedback is legit, but you certainly know that the negative comment is legit. And if you start to see 6 or 7, then maybe you say, I'm gonna send the enforcement officer there. But in the initial, I can see a crunch on the initial registration piece of it. But I think that once you get through the crunch, I think you've got a mechanism, because if you go on once a week and look at the Airbnb and see, okay, here's the ones that are in our area, and these are the negative comments, maybe we should do something about it.
And I think the Airbnb itself, the owner can open up their availability on the calendar, because when I went and was looking for something, it, has like a year out. And so you could look, if somebody has opened up their property for more than 30 days in a year, you can see if they mark it as available. And if they haven't registered, then they get a visit and can get fined for not registering. So the calendar's there for everybody to look at on any particular property. So that's something that, if we're gonna be monitoring anyway, we're gonna be looking at that. So.
Right.
So I wanted to jump in real quick to address, so we are looking at self-management of reviews, sort of self-policing from the Airbnb site. Some of our concern is, once we've had 6 or 7 bad reviews from potentially 6 or 7 different properties and 6 or 7 different property owners, then it's, well, I don't want to stay in Salisbury. I'll stay in Ocean City, I'll stay in Fruitland. If we can prevent that from happening by ensuring safety and quality, from a municipal perspective, we would like to ensure that as much as possible to prevent those bad reviews from something that isn't being regulated the way that it should be. Public policing and policing itself is one thing, but unsafe to the point of, well, why would I stay in Salisbury if they're all bad reviews? Why would I stay here?
But essentially, you've got the same thing with hotels. Now,
Sure,
you're gonna have people who are gonna do stupid things.
sure.
And we're not gonna be able to prevent those things. If it gets out of hand, people are gonna call the police and say, I got an issue here. The person who's staying in my house, if I'm there and they're giving me a problem, they're gonna have an issue. I think, to over-legislate,
Sure.
it doesn't do anything except eat up resources and cost money. So I think if we have tools that are already in existence, I don't say we shouldn't have inspections, I'm not saying that. But once they're inspected, I think that we have to go by with the data points that we get. Personally, that's how I would see it. If somebody's got 6 gigs, in the first 6 out of 15 rentals, you got an issue.
Sure.
So I would send the guy and say, go get them. But the resources, if you think about the numbers, the massive numbers, it could be, if we don't go with some combination of what Mir is talking about, I'm worried that we're gonna just be, then I'm worried about what happens to the rest of the city when we're trying to, and we do have issues that we just addressed a while ago. So that's just my input.
I can also research what other municipalities that have Airbnb registrations do about inspections, if they have inspections, if they do, and how they do inspections, and see if there's a consistency.
And again, one of the reasons we brought this to the forefront was on the understanding that we got National Folk Festival, and we've got some big things that are already currently happening, but also, coming up. Me, who does stay in Airbnbs, and would be considering even doing my house as an Airbnb, I look at my own option, like, what, I don't really want to be overly regulated. However, I also understand the position that we need to look at from a municipality of just making sure that we're ensuring quality. Now, with that said, we don't see an over-alarming amount of issues that are happening currently in our area. So one option is we have kind of a framework that we could table and know that we have some ideas that we have and just kind of continue to play it out and not do anything right now with policy, which would allow us to be self-regulating. Because again, there's there's not a lot of meat to it if we kind of keep it open and we're not necessarily going to force inspections. And especially if we're going to have exempt days, because there's probably only 5 or 6 real big weekends that people are going to be all in or not, because again, we're not a vacation destination when we're going to the
And I
beach.
think that, weeks leading up to those events are when you are gonna see the spike in people wanting to open their property to Airbnb or whatever. I think when that happens, you're not gonna be able to handle it, because you're trying to maintain your day-to-day operations, and then all of a sudden, you got 400 inspections that gotta be done in a week.
Would it be better to start putting together a system prior to the festival and to the marathon where we could advertise, in this room, we're gonna have, the city's gonna have a meeting about what you may potentially do with your property. And you have to get it in, go through all of those things, but at least give us an idea as to whether or not it's going to be 50 people who do it, or whether or not there's gonna be 500, because looking at these numbers for the hotels that people recommend, because I realize not all the hotels that we have here are on this list. If we're talking about the number of people that we're talking about, we have room for about 5,000 people. So they're gonna have to go somewhere. So the question really comes is, do we wanna get out in front of it?
The other issue we got is, people who live just outside of municipal boundaries. I don't see the county doing any regulation. So I think there's gonna be, that is another issue. And they've got significant more space and properties and homes, and I know some of those people that live out there are gonna do it. So, it could be a situation.
Well, I guess maybe what we could do with it is, if we advertise that we're gonna do it for property owners here, to just do an education process.
A seminar or something.
And then they can use, but there's a little Susan's face down at the bottom of the advertisement, city approved, so that people know that they are getting something that has been looked at and at least initially.
Safe.
So as, you could ask for an inspection to say this is a certified inspected
Maybe
place,
that's-
as more of like a
Taking
a
proactive
bonus.
approach.
I would
And to be
say,
honest with you, if that doesn't make somebody charge more,
No,
You're
but
guaranteeing that it's what it says it
I'm
is.
wondering if we should do it the first year as an optional program. Because we don't know what to expect especially with, the National Folk Festival. What if we did it as an optional program the first year, and to see how many people opted in, and then just, I don't know.
The optional program's good. I like the idea, though, of educating the people, and then actually probably having some people who do it very successfully, the people who have made comments and sent us some advice, and then do what you say. This, you've attended, this is we talked to them. If somebody wants us to voluntarily inspect their property.
We're gonna do 100% recycling in the Airbnb like we've done on the committee. I think we tie it all in together.
That's a good idea.
I think it makes more sense to empower than to regulate.
And we can use this year to educate.
Let's not ruin a good thing. We're going in a good direction.
Going in a good direction. We're actually doing both.
Yeah, we're doing both.
Yeah.
Is that, could we consider that?
I think we could consider that. Now, one of the questions is,
But
is it a definitely different piece of legislation with, I want to make sure I understand correctly. If are we talking about some sort of elective inspection to get the rubber stamp of certification?
it's a whole program
A
that
whole
we'd like you
program
to
that we
think
just-
about, saying
Okay.
education, inspection. He just volunteered.
I'm a hard ass.
Okay.
He just,
So, in that scenario, it would be more of like a policy rather than an ordinance, so it'd be more of just a,
I like let's see how it goes.
okay.
with
But
the
educate,
education and all that
Okay.
piece the first time.
And
If
also
there's a
for
real
safety.
downside to it, if you guys go back and talk about it,
because we're gonna have some people, who will get excited that, oh, wow, it's open doors, open season again in Salisbury, where they're gonna let anybody and everybody come through. We just gotta make sure that we can also
But Andy,
help them.
it's happening right
Oh,
now.
yeah,
I would say if we did a
If we start, if we do an
program like
education,
this,
we're gonna educate, we're gonna tell people, hey, come
That
on in. We
it's-
just gotta make sure that it's.
Yeah, that it's done maybe as an ordinance, even if it's done as an optional thing, because if we get somebody who pilfers your approval and puts it on their thing and we find it, it's $1,000 fine or whatever our maximum fine that we can do in an ordinance. We don't want somebody falsifying their thing when they didn't get an inspection.
certificate program.
Yeah.
Right.
Take a
Yeah.
picture of their certificate and
They
upload
opt
it or
in.
something.
And we would call the inspections courtesy inspections. They're
Yeah.
opting in with the courtesy program.
I would prefer to actually do the ordinance as an ordinance, because I appreciate Hardy's free market wiki bedrooms. That's fine, but I know Salisbury the way I know Salisbury. People are gonna try and
So do
do something that they shouldn't do with property that they shouldn't be doing it
So
in, because,
But the people that currently reside in Salisbury are doing things with property that they should not do.
so I'm assuming it's gonna happen again, so I think we should have rules.
but do we
No, I'm
do
saying
the
it's
tiered
a zero-sum
program with
game.
the ones that are below it, optional that want an inspection? That might not, rent, every weekend in the year, but maybe
Right.
during the events. Obviously this is gonna come back, so I don't know if we can come up with a happy medium.
I think there's,
How
we
many
could think about it.
complaints- How many issues have we had up to this point?
We've had none.
No.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't about the issues, it was about
No.
the potential with
Yeah.
an
Because
inflow.
The volume.
Coming.
The volume coming.
The
We
volume,
didn't really have a storm of them
the
coming.
volume.
And there could be issues, so we're trying to offset that.
I think we should have it anyway, regardless of whether or not we had, because I'm sure people have had issues. The question is whether or not they're gonna come forward and say anything. And then the question is who is the proverbial they that they speak of? When something goes wrong, somebody will say, they should do something about that. So the question really comes down to is, when somebody gets upset or somebody decides they're gonna go to a lawyer, who is the they you're going to go after? Is it going to be the municipality that had no rules for these things? Is it going to be the property owner that had no conscience for this thing? Is it gonna be, I think Hardy's correct, a lot of it takes care of itself because of usage and people saying what's good and what's not good. But where Councilman Rudolph and I sort of divulge a little bit from that is just, and maybe we can find the happy middle and all that.
Now, there is a possibility that by entering this arena, we're opening ourselves to liability. So, there's that. So, we do our inspection, we do all of that. This person does have our certification. And then that bad thing happens from that stranger from over there.
Turn the power off the day after we leave.
Well, I'd say there's no
And
more
then they're
line.
just like what the city said, it was okay. So, then we're liable at that point.
I think there's no more liability than when we do any inspection, because I could inspect your property today and you say you have an operating smoke detector, but when I leave, you can take that off the wall and throw it out the window, and you can have a fire and your house be destroyed. I'm just saying.
That's distinguishable because my property is long-term use. So then these properties have all been inspected by someone at some point already because they're here for long-term use. We'll know that newer properties for multifamilies will have to have sprinkler systems that work. And I'm also concerned about the additional workload that we're creating, and are we creating additional city jobs, and then are we costing the city more money than what we need to in an area where we haven't seen any issues yet?
I think that I'm gonna, if I can, I'm gonna cut this short.
There you go.
And the reason I'm gonna cut it short is because I think that there's been a tremendous dump of information.
Yeah,
I don't mean,
we could go
and I
on.
think, I think we're getting the gist of what we wanna see. We don't wanna see one of these things where we have to hire 50,000 people to go out and do all these inspections. We wanna have an educational piece of this thing, that will help the people who are considering doing it. And we don't wanna put in something to create a problem that we don't have. And then come back with some kind of recommendation at the next work session, so that we can, and to be honest with you, there's a couple things that I've made notes of that I wanna go on the internet. and research a little bit myself. So if we could, we'll bring this back tomorrow at the agenda meeting. We'll put it back on the next work session agenda, and then we'll go from there. Okay?
Yeah, I've got it. Can I throw in 30 seconds of one thing that wasn't addressed? The only thing that's also interesting is when we talk about rental properties, when she mentioned a rental property that is vacant, that they want to then be able to rent out on a short-term piece, I hesitate to understand the condition of that property, furnishings and all, that is vacating at that piece, if we do go down that path and do have any sort of conversation of vacant properties then becoming Airbnb properties. That's it.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good holiday.
You too, thank you.
Stay in a hotel.
We have one more item on the
No one's
agenda,
living in it.
and that's the salary recommendations and the salary ordinance.
Good evening, save the best for last. We've taken your recommendations and just, and put them in. So the final recommendation that council had moved forward with was $50,000 salary for the mayor, beginning in the fiscal year following the next election. So that would be July of 2020. And then, right, 19 is the election.
November.
Yeah, so then the next fiscal year, so July of 2020. That would increase the council president to 15,000 and increase the remaining 4 council members to 12,000.
Any discussion? We do have one request. Guess who?
Well, as a mere voter, resident, and taxpayer, the only thing I had to go on really was this review that this committee did. And I tried to break it down where it actually made some sort of sense. So I had to do a median, which was comparable, because it was broken down by survey of municipalities: Salisbury, Frederick, Wycomico County, Cumberland, Hagerstown, Dover, Ocean City, Cambridge, Easton, and Baltimore City. Why Wycomico County's even in there is beyond me, and Dover is beyond me, because it's not just about a salary, it's about the taxing obligation that we're used to every June. So I tried to sum it up by breaking it down by population and budget. And what I came up with are 5 major things. At $50,000, the mayor has a higher salary rate than all compared entities except for Ocean City, which is a false population difference because their population is 7,100. Population of Salisbury is 33,411. And their mayor only makes $30,000 a year. But if you take his rate, he makes $422 for the mayor and $1.55 for council president and $1.41 for a councilman. That's per person. And our mayor's rate would be $1.50 per person. Council president would be 45 cents, and the council would be 36 cents. So, in other words, you'd get paid, if we based the salary on population, and everybody brought in $1.50, and 45 cents and 36 cents, I wonder how much your raise would be. Anyway, the highest county tax rate, except for Baltimore, is Wycomico, and the lowest is Talbot. Dover is in a state that has the lowest, 47th out of 50 states in the country. As I said, I don't even know why that comparison was viable. The highest city tax, not including water, sewer, and waste, is .937, except for Cumberland at 96.54. Ours being 93.7. Council increase has a higher salary rate than all compared except Ocean City, once again because of the population difference, the false population, which is, again, 7,000 people, 400,000 in the summer. And they also have the money and revenue to pay for it because their budget is $131 million. Baltimore City, with a $2.2 billion budget and a population of 641,943 versus the Salisbury budget of 59 million and a population of 33,411, only pay 26 cents per taxpayer for the mayor, 17 cents per taxpayer for the council president, and 10 cents per council members. You want to pay $1.50 per person per taxpayer for the mayor, 45 cents per taxpayer for the council president, and 36 cents for council members. Mayor, 477% higher than Baltimore County. Council president, 167% higher than Baltimore. And a council member, 260% higher. So, I just wanted to throw that in. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have consensus? Yeah, okay, we have consensus. Any further discussion about anything?
No,
In that
just
case,
want to say Merry Christmas to everybody. Won't
Yes.
see anybody
Merry
until-
Christmas.
Merry
And,
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
And December 31st, make sure everybody comes out to our New Year's Eve bash downtown. So.
Yes, I'll be back. So I'll be down there with my cowboy hat. We are adjourned.